Thank you very much indeed, Chancellor Diermeier, and congratulations on the launch of the new institute, which sounds very important indeed. And as somebody coming from the academic world, I'm delighted to hear you underscore the role that universities can play in advancing these issues. Alan Turing did much of his work at Cambridge University that then went on to essentially help win World War II. And that's a pattern we're seeing played out today over and over again. But first, we're going to hear from General Timothy Haugh, who's the 4th Commander of the US Cyber Command and 19th Director of the NSA. He started his career studying Russian studies at Lehigh, and then went on to a very illustrious career in the military, holding all manner of roles around the world, and as Chancellor Diermeier just said, was recently appointed to run the Cyber Command and the NSA. So over to you, General Haugh, and then after that, Chancellor Diermeier is going to interview him and pick up some of the themes from his earlier remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tett, for the kind introduction, and Chancellor Diermeier for your earlier remarks. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. We're kicking off what I'm confident will be a very informative 2 days focused on the threats posed by the PRC, as well as our collaborative efforts across the military intelligence community to meet that challenge head-on. We are joined by several distinguished visitors, including Provost Raver, DEA Administrator Milgram, Ms. Shatil Patel, Assistant Director, Transnational and Technology Mission Center from CIA, Ambassador Hanso, the Estonian ambassador to China. We are also joined by individuals representing key institutions and organizations from across the country, including members of the Tennessee National Guard, the University of Chicago, the University of Tennessee, from, of course, Vanderbilt, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and many others. Special thank you to Chancellor Diermeier and the leadership and staff at Vanderbilt University, who have worked so hard to bring us this event on their beautiful campus. We're all grateful for the very warm welcome that you've given us. I must also commend Vanderbilt for their ongoing commitment to advancing innovation and education on issues of modern conflict and emerging threats. I haven't had the chance to meet with all of you, so as I've gone through my first 75 days in my new organizations, I've spent some time introducing myself. They've asked me a number of questions. Given where we're seated today, I thought I would share some of my musical interests. As I started to think about introducing myself, one of the things that I told everybody, I've got an eclectic music interest, from Garth Brooks to also some excitement over the fact that there's going to be a Nashville resident and former Pennsylvanian who's going to release a new album in 2 days. For those of you that aren't tracking, Taylor Swift is putting out a new album. So 3 months ago, I inherited the leadership of the National Security Agency and the United States Cyber Command, 2 remarkable organizations with unique but complementary missions. In my role as the commander of Cyber Command, we are responsible for U.S. military operations in cyberspace. We secure the Department of Defense's information networks and work with partners at home and around the world in support of U.S. national security interests. In my role as the director of the National Security Agency, we fill critical roles within the intelligence community, which are responsible for conducting signals intelligence and cybersecurity in support of the nation's most important strategic requirements. Individually, Cyber Command and NSA play key roles in national defense. But when our organizations have a unity of effort, we can achieve outcomes for our nation that no one else can. Underpinning this success is our incredibly talented workforce, whose skills and creative approaches to solving hard problems are modernizing the way the command and the agency respond to our determined adversaries worldwide. Today, I'd like to talk about the strategic environment. It's one of unprecedented threat and opportunity. There are 3 aspects that have tremendous ramifications for our national security: the competitive challenge and threat that the PRC poses, accelerating technological change that is producing a rapidly expanding art of the possible, and the growing numbers of non-state entities empowered through technological innovation who are capable of consequential effects with a global impact. First, the People's Republic of China presents a unique challenge to our nation. It has both the demonstrated intent and growing capability to threaten the existing global order. It is both an urgent military threat in the Indo-Pacific region and an enduring generational competitor across all elements of national power. Nowhere is this more evident than in the cyber domain. The PRC is engaged in a deliberate campaign to challenge the United States and our allies technologically while putting our critical systems and national infrastructure at risk. The PRC continues to grow the scope, scale, sophistication, and speed of its cyber capabilities. The PRC's cyber forces operate unconstrained by matters of law and international policy. They are highly capable and rapidly able to exploit opportunities. And they demonstrate a risk tolerance that allows them to operate across an open society while we counter them in their closed and centrally controlled environment. In 1973, China had a GDP of roughly 120 billion in today's dollars, with limited ability to impact the region, let alone the world. Today, its economy is in the trillions, rivaling that of the United States. China produces and drives cutting-edge technologies, and it is actively pursuing not just global relevance, but dominance. This dramatic shift in relative national power has been achieved absent of kinetic conflict. And we must recognize this. And we must be willing to contest the PRC below the level of armed conflict, particularly in cyber. Second, accelerating technological change and global interconnectedness produce a rapidly expanding art of the possible. Technological advances and innovation arise from diverse entities worldwide. Nation-state research and development is not the principal driver of technological change. Academia, corporations, and even individuals working in collaboration play rapidly growing and consequential roles. We live in a rapidly changing world. Today, a nation's fate is less a result of what it controls, but more of a result of how rapidly it adapts. It is no longer the big that eat the small, but now the fast that eat the slow. It used to be in national security that we generated the waves to ride. Now it's more about recognizing and riding waves we don't generate and don't necessarily control. The advantage will go to those that see first, recognize first, adapt first, and apply first. The world is not about to change fundamentally, it already has. We must recognize that fact within the national security community and adapt. When General C.Q. Brown was Chief of Staff of the Air Force, he wrote an article entitled, "Accelerate, Change, or Lose." I highly recommend it. Speed and agility are key, not only in operations, but in capability. How we develop and how we acquire. We must challenge established approaches and move toward rapid innovation to effectively prevail. We cannot succeed when our existing processes move slower than the rate of innovation and change. Third, a dramatically expanding set of global actors and non-state entities empowered by technology can create and exercise consequential impact during competition and conflict. We do not need to theorize about increased nuclear proliferation risk or rogue development and deployment of novel biological agents produced by AI to see that this is true. Instead, look to what we have seen in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where technology has had a consequential impact on the course of a war as a result of the actions of influential industry. Satellite technologies as an example. So what are the ramifications of this changing global environment? First, although the U.S. is effective today, we will not remain so without deliberate and rapid change. We can count on our adversaries to continually adapt and change. We cannot assume our continued technological dominance. We must behave differently. Second, drivers of change will emerge rapidly and unpredictably, making it imperative that U.S. organizations operate with agility and speed. We must change our organizational structures, relax constraints, and innovate to operate more effectively in a world where no single entity will have all of the talent, intellectual capital, data, computing capabilities, or authorities to meet unexpected challenges and create and exploit a fleeting opportunity. Third, it will be a necessity to collaborate in an agile manner, shifting across a number of stakeholders. We cannot act in isolation or rely on purpose-built industrial-age entities. Over the past 6 years, we have faced multiple threats in cyberspace, to include Russia, Iran, and the DPRK, as well as criminal organizations and other non-state actors. Yet the PRC represents the most formidable of these threats, with thousands of intelligence, military, and commercial sector personnel engaged in a deliberate campaign to steal our nation's intellectual property, threaten our national security and defense industrial base, and gain footholds in our critical infrastructure to do us harm. These are not isolated actions, but rather they are part of an ongoing campaign of continuous operation to advance China's drive towards global hegemony. U.S. Cyber Command and the NSA are responding via persistent engagement, continuous proactive operations which we work not in isolation, but in close collaboration across government agencies, with the private sector, academia, and our allies and partners. This broad collaboration toward a common purpose is a principal advantage in contesting China during competition and critical preparation for crisis. The collaborative relationships, partnerships, and complementary operations that Cyber Command and NSA are building today allow us to achieve agility, scale, and capabilities that we would not otherwise be available to us. Our nation has a substantial advantage over the PRC because of the value we place on freedom of thought. This allows us to innovate and partner quickly, whereas China's mindset is one of centralized control. Cyber Command and NSA recognize that we cannot merely respond and react to cyber threats to our nation's networks. Rather, we must be proactive, persistent, and resilient. At Cyber Command and the NSA, we believe that cyber defense is a team sport, and we want to continue to expand our teammates. Let me give you some examples of where we're working with our partners on a daily basis to make it harder for malicious cyber actors to operate. Hunt forward operations. To understand an adversary, their techniques, tools, and infrastructures, Cyber Command deploys small teams to hunt for them in allied networks. We receive requests from friendly governments for assistance in assessing their networks for vulnerabilities and adversary presence. And then we help them expose and mitigate malicious cyber activity. By doing this, we gain crucial insights that we then share with others, enabling broad foreclosure of adversary opportunities in cyber. It constrains our activities, and it imposes costs. Since 2018, Cyber Command's Cyber National Mission Force has conducted hunt-forward operations in 28 different countries. Over that time, these operations have matured into an important pillar in the defense of our nation. Cyber Command has also expanded collaboration with interagency and international partners, and has relied on these relationships to disrupt revenue-building operations, disrupt adversarial cyber ecosystems, and secure the Department of Defense networks and critical infrastructure systems from foreign adversaries. Over the last 2 years, these partnerships have led to disruption operations to multiple ransomware and malware networks used by foreign cyber actors, operations causing loss of trust within the adversary's cyber ecosystem, sanctions against foreign companies that have been connected to foreign adversaries, and federal indictments on foreign cyber actors who have conducted cyber attacks against the United States and our systems. Cyber Command intends to continually generate mutual beneficial outcomes at scale with our partners by enabling them to use our authorities and capabilities. This is deeply advantageous for the United States, as well as in our efforts against other nation-state and malicious cyber actors. Since 2021, there have been over 20,000 distinct cybersecurity vulnerabilities identified each year, with the most vulnerabilities, 29,000, discovered in 2023 alone. To be effective in such an environment is going to require collaboration. That's why in 2020, the NSA created the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, which allows us to work side by side with over 1,000 public and private partners to identify foreign intelligence efforts to acquire sensitive proprietary technology. The CCC has issued dozens of cybersecurity advisories. These unclassified reports detail adversary attack vectors and the vulnerabilities they seek to exploit, as well as the mitigations to employ in their order to defend and eradicate them. These CSAs cover a wide variety of topics, such as ransomware guidance to include best practices for home use, artificial intelligence, and activities of nation states such as Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. As recently as February, one advisory was dedicated specifically to threats of PRC-sponsored actor Volt Typhoon and the targeting by the PRC of the communications, energy, transportation, water, and wastewater systems in the United States and our territories. At Cyber Command, industry collaboration is through an effort called Under Advisement, in which the command maintains an ongoing relationship with cybersecurity firms, researchers, and individuals across the cyber ecosystem. By exchanging information and working collaboratively, the command works proactively to address and counter threats. An important point in understanding our approach to seeing national security more broadly than just the military element of national power, a point driven by the nature of the environment that the SecDef, the Director of National Intelligence, and other national leadership are very clear on. For NSA, as an intelligence and combat support agency, and Cyber Command as a combatant command, it means a broadening set of interactions. In the future, U.S. Cyber Command and the outcomes that we pursue may not be our own, but rather enabling a demarche from State Department, a sanction from Treasury, or an arrest by the FBI. Thus far, what I've really tried to lay out is how we're thinking about engaging with our adversaries in continuous cyber operations, as well as collaboration with partners, and how that creates advantage for the nation. Now I'd like to pivot and talk a little bit about how we're posturing to bring advantage through innovation in a world of rapidly emerging technological change. As you know, artificial intelligence is a leading focus for the government. It has the capability to upend multiple sectors of society simultaneously. As we think about our military, our economy, international relations, technological growth, AI has the ability to be used against the network and systems we've been entrusted to defend. It is essential that we stay ahead of our global competitors in the race to understand and harness its potential, as well as to protect ourselves from adversarial use. China is demonstrating a higher degree of sophistication in its influence activity, including experimenting with generative AI. China also announced its global AI governance initiative to bolster international support for its vision of AI governance. In response, Cyber Command and NSA are working in a united front to meet these challenges head on. Last year, NSA drew on the successful partnership model of the Cyber Collaboration Center to establish the AI Security Center, which has already become a key component of NSA's cybersecurity mission. It will advance the science of AI and ensure secure development, integration, and adoption of AI within our national security and DIB partners. NSA created an AI roadmap to counter that of China's, with the goal of detecting and countering threats, drive and deepen partnerships across the government, industry, and academia, and develop, evaluate, and promote best practices. Publish mitigation solutions to advance secure development, integration, and adoption of AI within our national security systems and our defense industrial base. AI, like other tools and authorities, carries risks. By ensuring that we are using them in a carefully controlled, regulated, and transparent manner, we can harness them to advance our national interests without threatening the rights of our citizens. NSA is uniquely positioned to take on this charge because of our multiple authorities levied by Congress and the President for the protection of national security systems and the defense industrial base, because of our strong dedication to civil liberties, privacy, and transparency, and because of NSA's cadre of experts working directly on the science of AI. NSA has a long record of bringing technical expertise to bear and deliver value through collaboration in the public sector. As examples, Secure Enhanced Linux. NSA developed and introduced Security Enhanced Linux 23 years ago, and every major computer operating system in use today now incorporates elements of SE Linux or its technical approaches. Ghidra, the reverse engineering tool and core capability for vulnerability research, developed and shared with the public in 2019, has been recognized as an R&D 100 top technology innovation and also as one of the top 25 job apps of all time. Beyond these technical achievements in cybersecurity, NSA is a recognized leader and sponsor of key research and development in the areas of AI human language technology, quantum information science, and high-performance computing. Building on a series of new authorities and expectations, Cyber Command has also developed an AI roadmap and is working to apply AI and cybersecurity to better identify and close vulnerabilities across the Department of Defense networks. AI is a tool that will enable our mission, It's a tool that the talented members of our cyber operations force have been using for years, along with support from our partners, especially DARPA, and as well as those DoD federally funded research and development centers and our university partners such as Vanderbilt. We have implemented machine learning models across our missions and currently use AI for operations across our various missions. We have established an AI task force within Cyber Command to move us from opportunistic AI application to systematic adoption, again driven by strategic and tactical objectives that will focus on 3 important outcomes. First, we are focused on delivering AI capability for cyber mission force operations and taking steps to integrate our AI task force even more closely with operations. Second, we are posturing Cyber Command to enable AI adoption at scale by addressing many of the non-material issues, like policy and standards that we are required to allow responsible, ethical, assured, and secure application of AI. Finally, our no-fail missions mean that we are laser-focused to counter AI threats and exploiting emerging opportunities. One of the ways we're getting smarter on AI, as well as other emerging technologies, is through our extensive and expanding academic relationships throughout the country. NSA has over 400 partnerships with colleges and universities through our Centers for Academic Excellence, which are designed to help students understand NSA's mission and how we might partner in the future should they want to pursue a career in cybersecurity, whether at NSA or within industry. We also have labs at 7 institutions, to include one here at Vanderbilt, where students can work on real-world problems. Cyber Command was recently designated as a federal laboratory, which will enhance our capacity to drive innovation, collaborate with academia and industry leaders, and contribute significantly to achievements in the development of cyber technologies. We are also using cooperative research and development agreements and educational partnering agreements to collaborate with industry and academia, integrate commercial technology, and grow our footprint in the S&T and academic communities. Accelerating these initiatives will require resources. When Congress passed the FY24 appropriation in March, Cyber Command assumed direct responsibility for executing the management and the budget for the Cyber Mission Force. This marks the culmination of several years of planning for a responsibility that was previously left to the military services. With this authority, Cyber Command will better able to ensure coherent investment towards our highest priorities. We'll partner with the services and improve the department's overall approach to investments and acquisition of cyber capabilities. What do I want to leave you with today? We live in a dramatically changing world where no entity working in isolation will have all that is required to respond to emerging threats or to create and exploit fleeting opportunity. Therefore, advantage will go to those best postured to work in collaboration with others. Accelerating technological change creates a rapidly expanding art of the possible. Those who work with others to see, understand, and apply first will be best postured to adapt, innovate, and succeed in a rapidly changing world. China is pursuing deliberate campaigns to gain advantage in every aspect of national power. We will succeed by moving more quickly to recognize and contest threats, to innovate and apply technologies, and to recruit and expand allies and partners. Agility and speed will be required to gain and maintain advantage. Underlying all these initiatives is our talented workforce. Technology is a tool and not a substitute for a skilled, creative, and innovative personnel. NSA and Cyber Command's workforces continue to be our most important competitive advantage. Yes, the threat posed by China is real. The PRC has the desire and the ability to make themselves our peer on the world stage. But the unity of effort demonstrated on a daily basis by Cyber Command and NSA create advantage for our nation, and that will not be understated. There is an opportunity through extended collaboration to bring greater unity of effect for the nation and the Department of Defense in cybersecurity and the application of emerging technology. Both organizations can play a role in that we have unique technical experience and we have adversary insights that allow us to be a fire starter for innovation and acceleration for the Department of Defense by leveraging our talented and highly technical workforce, the partnerships that we've formed across industry and academia, NSA's long history of significant technical contributions to critical technologies, and Cyber Command's focus on leveraging our new acquisition authorities and software acquisition pathways to operationalize the process of quickly bringing new capabilities to our cyber warfighters. Finally, Cyber Command's Constellation partnership with DARPA will allow a scalable model to overcome the valley of death in critical cyber technologies. The unity of effort of both NSA and Cyber Command offers a powerful opportunity to leverage the unique but complementary cybersecurity missions, authorities, and expertise of both organizations to provide combined advantage countering malicious cyber activity. Together, we can lead the department in advancing beyond what is today a mindset that was built initially on industrial age approaches to a threat-informed and risk-based approach, consistent with our laws and our values that harness our AI and high-performance computing efforts to reduce China's freedom of maneuver and effectiveness. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you today, and now we have time for some questions.
General Haugh, let me first welcome you again to Vanderbilt. It's wonderful to have you with us today. And I want to start with some of the things you talked about as you're assuming this new role. Let's start with the most obvious question. You'll be the first Air Force officer to helm Cybercom. The first three commanders came from the Army and the Navy. What does it mean to have somebody from the Air Force to assume that role?
So I think from my perspective, what it really is about are we growing the talent in the Department of Defense that can assume these roles across all of our combatant commands. So when we talk about talent and who serves in combatant command roles, I think it is far less about the service we come from and really the skills that we potentially bring to the role. And because I know that's how I evaluate for every hire that I make, is about where are we today in terms of the type of talent we need. And the exciting part for us is that as the department has grown in the cyber mission, we're now seeing leaders that have grown up doing this mission from a tactical level. They've succeeded and done work at an operational level, and now they're going to reach strategic positions. So I think the exciting part is we're developing talent that is able to do these roles in the department.
Wonderful. And one little organizational comment. You see at the screen behind me not only the general's name and my name, but also the ability to send questions. So if you have a question, I'll start with some questions and start the conversation, but please send them in. And then they will show up at my high-tech device right here. So I'm not doing email on the side. I'm like keeping an eye on questions that are coming in. There was some fascinating ideas and perspectives that you provided, and particularly I think on how some of the challenges are changed, or how the speed of technological progress is changing, about how we need to think about the role of Cyber Command, the NSA, and so forth. And I'm going to connect with one of the metaphors that you were using, which I thought was particularly apt to capture that, is we were used to make the wave, and now we have to surf the wave. And that puts a tremendous amount of importance on speed, agility, coming from a world where sometimes public perception is that universities operate at glacial speed. They're not known for their speed and agility. A totally wrong perception, by the way, just for the record. But my sense is that you will face similar perceptions, is that governmental agencies they may not be the first example that come to mind when you think about speed and agility, but more generally, there is organizational questions, there are people questions, there are questions about culture. Just take us a little bit inside about how do you think about accelerating speed and agility as we're thinking about these challenges and the changing environment.
So I think we have a different challenge than most of the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. So when we think about what goes on across acquisition in the department, we think about ships, submarines, airplanes. Within NSA and Cyber Command, we are largely talking about writing code. So from our perspective, how we approach that does have an opportunity to leverage best practices from industry. How do we think about rapidly testing and being able to take risk in an environment where we have the opportunity to control that environment? So I think those are things that are advantages for us. The other areas that are advantages is how the Department of Defense has given us increasing levels of authority. So NSA has long been an organization where the nation is relied upon for development and within the government context of specific technologies. But increasingly within Cyber Command, the department and Congress have now given Cyber Command the authority for acquisition of all of our capabilities. So we're the acquisition authority. We now have controlled the budget for all of those activities that we execute both internally and in partnership with the military department. And then we also are responsible for how we set the requirements for what the department needs in cyberspace. So inside that, there's an opportunity for us to be able to move very quickly in identifying what we need, applying resources, and then moving out to be able to integrate those capabilities. What our question will be, how much of that will we do inside for our cyber mission force, where we have to be excellent at? We've got to be able to give our force the best capabilities. But how can we also make the overall Department of Defense better? As we think about cybersecurity and we think about all the way down to a weapon system or a post-camper station that might be in some other geographic area, how do we help them grow cyber capabilities that will be part of a much more coherent ecosystem? We have a lot of opportunity space there, and the department's given us a lot of trust. We now have to deliver on that.
Wonderful. So a couple of the themes that resonated with me as you were talking about this too was questions about people, innovation. We talked about the speed, partnerships. I think the partnership side is another aspect of this. This makes these challenges particularly difficult. And I remember well, and many in this room will remember well, as when we look back to the post kind of 9/11 security landscape, one of the challenges there was how do we think about protection of critical infrastructure from like physical kinetic attacks, terrorist attacks, and so forth. And that required already the collaboration between private sector and the national security agencies because so much of the critical infrastructure is privately owned. Now, as we're moving into a world where cyber threats are arguably maybe the dominant threat of our time, how do we make sure that this works effectively and efficiently? Because clearly, even though we have working partnerships, but the incentives are different, the way things are organized are different, how do we make sure that this partnership works as effectively as we can imagine it?
So I think one of the areas that we have seen is really clear expectations throughout the executive branch. So when I look at the National Defense Strategy or I look at the National Intelligence Strategy, there's clarity in that our pacing challenge is China. And so as we align ourselves, there's also so many common interests. And when we think about the partnerships that we have across the executive branch, the U.S. government brings a whole series of tools to those challenges. So when we think about at our core, what drives national security in the United States? It's our economy. That's the foundation of our national security. So how we think about intellectual property theft and how we can enable industry or our teammates that are responsible for domestic cybersecurity in FBI and in DHS, how do we enable them to help protect our overarching foundation of our economy, or of our national security, which is our economy? So that's an example of really having unity of effort against a clear set of objectives. So in NSA, that means we have to think about what is the intelligence that we need to produce that aligns to those series of priorities that is outlined in the National Defense Strategy, the National Security Strategy, and the National Intelligence Strategy. Those are harmonized, and I think we're seeing a very clear demand signal that is looking not just to our fellow military partners, but all of the elements across the executive branch that are working across the United States to set a foundational both economic and technical security for the United States.
I'm getting like 3 questions on critical infrastructure. Clearly, like this is something that people are particularly interested in. I'm having, maybe go a little bit deeper. I had like 2 questions on that. Clearly, people are interested in that. On like questions like power plants, water systems, internet capabilities, and also whether you can give us an update on addressing World Typhoon.
So I think first and foremost, when we think about these areas for both NSA and Cyber Command, it starts with enabling this conversation. Right? If you would look back even 2 years ago, would we have been able to talk about a PRC cyber actor with a level of specificity of what they've done, where they've done it, what techniques they've used, and to be able to put that out in an extensive series of documents that lay out exactly their techniques, their procedures, and to do that with many elements of the US government that contribute to that, the fact that we've had international partners contribute to that, and industry all collaborating to spell out at an unclassified level how China is targeting our critical infrastructure and what techniques they're using that would potentially target the Department of Defense. That's the foundation. If we all can have that conversation, and we can have it in this room about what China's doing, how they're doing it, now we can get to unity of effort and how we respond. And so I think that for us is really foundational. So when we think about any part of a campaign, it starts with how do we generate insights. That's one of our core roles that we can do that will help not only other elements within the national security community, but it can help all the way down to the local county that's trying to think about cybersecurity for the first time, that they can understand this threat and have a conversation at state, local governments, because at our core, all of us operate every day in our hometowns is off of infrastructure that has never thought about the possibility of a nation state targeting them. And so the fact that we can generate those insights really is then a capability that allows us to enable defense. That now we're starting from a known series of things. And in reality, one of the most impactful players that will have many ways determine our overall cybersecurity as a nation is going to be industry. They build the domain, they operate the domain, and they provide services to those same state and local governments. How do they understand the threat? How can they rapidly accelerate their overall cybersecurity? And then the part that's uniquely national security, how do we impose costs? How do we make it more difficult for China to operate in that space using all the tools that are available within the executive branch and also with our partners?
So I want to pivot to China in a minute, but I had a couple of questions on structure. And very interesting question. So we have full acquisition authority now. We're moving towards a unified combatant command. Do you see a future where cyber service becomes kind of the equivalent of a whole new service like a Space Force? Are we going to have Cyber Force?
So I think from our perspective, this is a question Congress has asked us. So we actually have a study underway right now with the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber. So the Commander of U.S. Cyber Command and the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber. We've been given a series of studies that we are to deliver this summer. One of those is how our forces are generated, currently generated through the 4 military services. The second one is on what is the structure of our headquarters. The third is about creating our acquisition organization. We have a number of other smaller studies, but the last one that was really impactful was a Defense Science Board review of our overall warfighting architecture in cyberspace. So our intent is to take all of those studies and package them into what we've described as Cyber Command 2.0. What does it look like for the future of Cyber Command? And inside that, one of the things that Congress has specifically asked us to do is how do we make our force? And it should include how the services generate today as the status quo to creating a cyber service. And we're evaluating all of those to give back to the Secretary of Defense in June. I think from our perspective, we also want to be thinking about not just how it would affect Cyber Command, but also how would it affect the Department of Defense? Like what makes us, because we need not just the forces that are given to Cyber Command to be great. We need every service to be great at cyber because they operate, every weapon system they operate is really a cyber weapon system. So how we think about that and how we evaluate it, we hope to give a really good input to the Secretary this summer.
Well, fascinating. So let's pivot to China. Give us a sense for how advanced China's offensive cyber capabilities are. I mean, Xi Jinping has said that the goal is to make China a cyber superpower. And then what does the US needs to take to ensure it remains ahead of China, particularly when it comes to advanced IT capabilities like AI and quantum computing? You talked extensively about AI, but it'd be great if that could be connected to Chinese capabilities a little bit more directly.
So I think one of the things that we certainly want to be able to do, what you see in Volt Typhoon is an example of how China has approached establishing access to put things under threat. Like there is not a valid intelligence reason to be looking at a water treatment plant from a cyber perspective. So there is clearly what looks like something that would be pre-positioning. So they're sending a pretty loud signal of how they intend to use cyberspace in a crisis. We should listen to that. So that's part of what that is. Where they are using more advanced capabilities and have done so for over a decade is partly in how they steal intellectual property. Intelligence operations to be able to extract data from Western nations to do an area where we still have significant advantage, and that's innovation. So stealing our innovation. So inside that, those tools, one of the areas that AI helps us today and can continue to help us is how do we rapidly evaluate those tools? How can we look for vulnerabilities in those tools? How can we look for indicators for those? And then how do we rapidly make those things automated to be able to capture indications with our industry partners to accelerate their pursuit of China within their own customer base? So I think those are things that we can enable, and we have to think about how do we compliantly share our data? Because we think first, and this is, our requirements for how we handle data are different than industry. We will start with a foundation that is about civil liberties, privacy, and then how we transparently talk about that. And so that means we have to know exactly where every piece of data came, what authority we received it under, and then how we use it to ensure we do it consistent with our law. So that's an area that does make us move a little bit more slowly, but we do it for good reason. And so how we apply these technologies also allows us to buy back some of that speed.
I think it's impossible to think about China without thinking about Taiwan. And so I think one important debate that's going on in Washington, of course, is whether China will attempt to use force to reunify with Taiwan. But can you talk a little bit about the non-kinetic actions you see China potentially taking in regards to Taiwan, and then what the US and its allies can do about it?
Well, I think from our perspective, our job is to make sure that we never see that day. And as a Department of Defense, as we think about integrated deterrence, it's our role in cyberspace to be a part of that multi-domain team that really continues to deter China from doing things that will be against our national security interests. So that's a foundational start point for us. I think we can look at what is happening today in Russia, Ukraine to inform us as to what is conflict going to look like. As we see the use of drones that have now taken on different perspectives and so rapidly changing in what that has meant for that conflict, we can see what it has meant for how data and information have been so critical in that conflict. And the area that I think that we have to really be mindful of is thinking about what the information environment would look like in a crisis with China, and how they would use the tools that are available to them in the information environment, and what would be the implications of that, both within the region and with our population. Those are areas that I think we have to continue to really be thoughtful about as we go forward.
We had a little bit of a discussion of that during breakfast, when we had a quite passionate discussion over Oppenheimer and the point of view of on the movie and how it was done. But I think one thing that was I think that reminded us, when we saw the film, and whether we thought it was overproduced as I thought and others thought it was great. So anyway, we put that aside. Okay, but there is I think one thing that is so striking of that is whenever we have new technologies of conflict, it raises whole new strategic questions as well. And I think one of the aspects of that is, as we're thinking about our institute, is that we want to bring together experts that have the engineering expertise on cyber, but then also we need to have policymakers and people that think about the strategic aspects, the international relations aspect, if you will. And I think one thing that was so fascinating after the development of nuclear weapons and the type of capabilities that came with that, it created a whole new way of thinking strategically. The birth of game theory, mutually assured destruction, flexible response. As horrific the consequences where they were contemplated, I think it was also a time when we had kind of quality of strategic thinking that was really that there was a quality there that stayed with us for decades. So in cyber conflict, I think just raises a whole new set of challenges on that. For example, when somebody is sending out a ballistic missile, not so easy to know where a particular cyber attack comes from. So questions of attribution, deterrence need to be rethought in this environment. Can you give us a little bit of sense of how you're thinking about that? Let's call it the strategic nature of that.
So I think this is a perfect area when we talk about your institute to have conversations around. Like, what has changed in our overall deterrence theory, not yet addressing cyber? When we think about now multiple nations, that both China and the PRC with peer capabilities from a nuclear perspective, how does that change our approach? With game theory being a two-actor game,
yes,
we now have a multi-actor game. So there's a number of things where we start with that foundational understanding of game theory that now we do attempt to apply it in different parts of our strategic theory that no longer really are representative of the environment we're in. So there is an opportunity for us to really be thinking about what are the implications. And when we think about is deterrence in cyberspace a possibility, given the environment that we're in today and what it already means for the activity in cyberspace. And how much of that needs to be thought through, not a cyber versus cyber lens, but really a whole of nation and a response to an activity in cyberspace that we feel puts a threat to our national security or national security of an ally, or is so outside the bounds of international law that it requires a response. Those are areas that we have to explore, likely through a new lens, not through the lens of our past, because they may no longer apply.
Great. I mean, I think one other thing, we spent some, there were a lot of questions about critical infrastructure, and we talked about that, and the possibility of disruption, and then how to think about that and how to partner with the private sector. There's a whole nother dimension that, of course, is a whole new area of conflict that now has to do with influence operations, or in military defense information operations, where we are thinking about strategic coordinated effects carried out to shape opinions, belief, misinformation of target audiences towards a specific goal or agenda. And of course, that seems to be a significant area of growth for our adversaries. So can you give us a little bit, can you discuss about the relationship between influence or information operations and cyber operations, and how important are these operations to national security?
Yeah, I think that largely information operations are foundational for every operation that the department will do going forward. We have to be thinking about the information environment component of those activities. I think we saw it again in Russia, Ukraine. The fact that the United States really used sensitive intelligence to be able to demonstrate to the world what we believed Russia was going to do, when they were going to do it, to really set the tone of this is what it needs to be for the international dialogue. That was in and of itself a strategic use of information to be able to drive support for an ally. The other aspects, I think, from a military perspective that we need to be thinking about, how are we preparing our force for their likely involvement in a conflict, and what will the information operations look like targeting our military force? How well are we prepared for that? Is that an area that commanders talk about, that if they're going to receive messages that are personalized on their own devices, those are things we need to be thinking about how we prepare. But it's not just within a military environment. I think we have seen some shifts in the cybercrime world that have already moved to information operations. that not just ransomware and holding things at risk, but hacking and extracting information that is now held as a coercive tool for a ransom that is really about the disclosure of information. So it's not just something that is within a military domain or between nations. This could be very personal for any business in the Western society that's targeted by an actor and coerced based off of a hacking activity that would disclose information that would either be embarrassing or lose some form of competitive advantage. So it's a part of our daily lives, and it's certainly going to be a part of military activities moving forward.
So let's talk a little bit about the U.S. election defense. Obviously, we have an election coming in the fall. Can you talk a little bit about election defense operations and how they've changed over the years, and specifically, how are you thinking about securing the ability for the United States to have fair and proper elections in the fall?
So from a Department of Defense perspective, we have a very clear assigned mission. So the Secretary of Defense in 2018 assigned to Cyber Command and NSA the role to be thinking about foreign threats outside the United States that would attempt to impact our elections. And so with that, there's a series of things that are expected from us. How do we understand the threat environment? And how do we communicate that to all of our national security partners? And then if there's a potential for cyber threats to our elections or our election process, how do we get that information to the right individuals? So for us, that means how do we partner with the FBI? How do we partner with DHS as the lead federal agency that is responsible for election infrastructure? How do we get to them that information that could get to states, to local, and to tribal individuals that are executing our elections? So we're thinking about foreign threat. And those threats, I think we have seen evolve since 2018 to now our fourth election cycle that we have been a part of the national security team defending our elections. And from our perspective, we really think about it in the same way we think about anything else. How do we generate insights about foreign threats? How do we enable defense from those activities? And then how do we ensure that we're being a part of the team that is making it more difficult to them to operate and impose costs? So I certainly think we have seen in the entirety of this environment a change in the technology. And I think for this cycle, the area that we are wanting to inform that threat is one of those is around generative AI.
So I'd like to pivot in the remaining few minutes that we have towards the role that higher education can play in advancing this agenda. One aspect has to do with talent. And talent, really, on one hand, there's the technical or the engineering talent. By some estimates now, China is producing 7 times as many engineers as the United States. Obviously, that starts in K-12 already. But what can the educational sector, including universities, do to create the talent, and then also make sure that that there's a pipeline of students that are interested potentially in a career in cyber or at the NSA, and how do we make sure that we can compete against the salaries that can be paid by the private sector? Tell us a little bit about the talent pipeline and how we can be helpful in this context.
So first I'll start within our organizations, because I think there are things we control within our organizations. One of those is culture. And it's about how we really give hard problems that have consequence to a really talented group of leaders, both in Cyber Command and NSA. And what we want to ensure is that we're bringing the best talent in, giving them those hard problems, and then really we're not going to match them dollar for dollar, but we do want to make sure that they are getting benefits to the maximum extent that we can. And we get great support from Congress and the Department of Defense to be able to do that. Within Cyber Command, we're a growing organization. That's an area for us as we set the culture of Cyber Command. We certainly win with people, and we want to be able to offer opportunity, not just for those cyber operators on a keyboard, but we need acquisition professionals that can lead and build capability that will allow our nation to be better defended. So that's a different set of talent that we want to bring in. The areas that we want to partner with, how do we leverage our relationship with all of the universities that both in NSA and Cyber Command that we have relationships with, and be able to give hard problems to work together. I was excited by the things that your team is working here and looking at how we do malware analysis, how we look at generative AI and spear phishing, and how do we develop counters for that. Those are exciting things that when you magnify those across 400 universities, but we should have a number of problems solved and be able to entice people to this type of work. So I think that's one. The area we can probably collaborate together on is how do we collaborate on curriculum? Like how do we bring back through our academic partnerships our perspective on curriculum, and also through those bodies that are going to evaluate curriculum and going to approve certain degree programs. How could we help lend a voice that accelerates the change that's necessary in that curriculum to remain viable for those national security problems? And then how do we collaboratively all across the nation, both industry, academia, and government, do activities that bring youth, particularly within schools or in summer camps, to be able to be introduced to STEM and these type of activities earlier. We participate, we have, NSA runs a series of NSA generational camps, cyber gen camps, with a number of universities. We see that as foundational. And then we want to partner with any 501c or any other element that's out there that is doing STEM education. An example of that is Cyber Patriot, that has 5,000 teams competing across the United States to do cyber challenges. We're going to capture them as early as possible, not necessarily to all come into national security, but our nation needs to close that gap.
Final question is on research on hard problems. So what are the wicked problems that keep you awake at night? And then we have a group of very talented people in here, including some of our very best faculty. What should they be working on?
So I think when we think about the future, so what does it look like in terms of the challenges that are in front of us? An area that is at our core. So from an NSA perspective, we make code and we break code. That's the core of what NSA does. What is behind that is compute. And so as compute continues to evolve, how are we posturing the national security community to ride that wave? Right? That's an example of a wave that we're now catching instead of our history, which is we were in front of. And it's one that is changing rapidly, and we have to leverage every little bit of our authorities that we have in both NSA and Cyber Command to make sure that we're still on top of that wave. And doing that in partnership with academia, with industry, in ways that we haven't done in the past. And so I think that's one really good example. I think our other example is, for us, how do we as NSA and Cyber Command capture the talent that we have and the ability where I think we can ride those waves? How can we help the department be in that wake? Right? It's a large organization that has many challenges in terms of we have capability that we are sustaining that is 50 years old in an environment that we want to make a zero trust architecture. Like those challenges, there are others that are dealing with the same things throughout industry and through when we think about our local critical infrastructure. How do we secure that? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't require everyone to physically rip out every device when we know we're not going to be able to afford that? So I think how we think about cybersecurity is an environment for us where we can do that together, and thinking about not just if you have a perfect environment, but the dirty environments we all live in, how do we make them less targetable by a nation like China?
Well, General Haugh, thank you again for joining us today and for being part of a broad, wide-ranging, informative, and candid conversation. Thank you very much.